I would say at least 3/4 of the Gospel of Mark can be identified in terms of intertextual connections.
Ladies and gentlemen, Derek Lambert, host of MythVision. I'm joined by the legend, Dr. Dennis R. McDonald. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you, Derek.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to what we're going to be talking about here. Specifically, you're going to be working on a mimesis. It's going to be more than that, but it's going to be really doing something no one else has done. I'm going to have you elaborate and tell us really what you're going to do with a commentary on Mark. I was just encouraging you to do one on Acts, but we'll put Mark on the table today. And many people in the field are going to need to see this because clearly mimesis criticism, what you pioneered and really are trying to get people to see, that's an ancient practice. This is not something you're pulling out of your hat because you saw a parallel and went, oh, there's more than one parallel. They're connections. This is an ancient practice that anyone learning how to read and write in schools were aware of in these days, ancient times. So tell us what you're wanting to do with the Gospel of Mark. Why is it unique? Take us into the weeds.
Thank you, Derek. You're most generous in your affirmation. This commentary is going to be unlike any other. It's not going to be theological. It's not going to be historical. In some cases, it's going to be literary, but not literary in the typical sense. That is, I'm not going to chart characterization and episode sequences and so on. I'm going to do something that's really very simple and also very difficult. I'm going to use the 3 categories of ancient rhetoric on how students who are writing are to use antecedent texts. The first one is epimomnesis. Epimomnesis is basically citation or allusion to a text that a reader would know. So you could be a quotation from Plato. It could be a quotation from Euripides. It could be from Homer. But it's a citation. So it's not creative, but it's used for argumentation.
Could it be scripture?
And it could be scripture. And
Gotcha.
for Jews and Christians, it was largely scripture.
Gotcha.
The second is paraphrasis. The paraphrasis is where we get our word paraphrase. And I'll talk about it as rewriting or revision. And the model that one uses for revision is called a prototypos. A prototypos is a source, so that you're simply rewriting a source on the same topic.
Gotcha.
Now, we have commentaries that are interested in biblical citation as a form of intertextuality. Absolutely appropriate.
Right.
We also have some source critics who have said, okay, we have some paraphrasis or rewriting of sources, but none has argued that Mark is using the source Q.
Right.
Or the Logoi of Jesus. They manufacture sources like the miracle story source or an apocalypse source or a passion narrative source, but it's all fragmentary. I'm convinced that the Gospel of Mark is using as its protopitos the Logoi of Jesus.
Yeah, that'll be a unique form of this commentary.
Although other scholars have tried to do certain kinds of source redaction criticism, but they haven't done what I'm doing.
Okay.
But no commentary has done the most important kind of intertextuality, and that's mimesis.
Gotcha.
And mimesis allows an author to use texts that are not biblical and not Christian antecedent texts, but world literature, Greek poetry, Greek philosophy, other Greek letters potentially, whatever, because you don't have the same topic. And so here, mimesis is using a typos. A typos is a type. And it's a model that you use, and that's the word I'll use in the commentary. So I go through Mark and I identify every time that Mark is giving a biblical allusion or citation or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And I put it in parallel columns. So you have the biblical text in this column. You have Mark's use of it in this column with Greek words identified when you have them in common. Then I go through Mark and I have all the places where Mark has parallel content with the Logoi of Jesus. And I, throughout the text, indicate every time why you have reverse priority that points out to the Logoi of Jesus, that there was this text.
Right.
And so I put the Logoi of Jesus here, and then I put Mark here, and the wording they have in common in Greek.
You always highlight or color, you do different things, yeah.
But mimesis is the most important part, and it's the most interesting because it allows one to look at texts that are not Jewish and not Christian, but potentially Homeric or the Greco-Roman world.
A tragedy, a poet, yeah.
Yeah, and in Mark also is writing a founding epic to rival Virgil's Aeneid, and Virgil is imitating Homer.
Right.
So what I do is I put the model in this column, and I put Mark in this column with the Greek words that agree underlined, and it is an amazing result going through the Gospel of Mark and identifying what its intertexts are. Nobody has done this. Now, people can make their own theological judgments about it. They can make literary judgments about it. I'm just interested in charting the intertextuality of it.
Yeah.
And I have charts that show in fact, I have one here that you might want to put on the screen. Of how these things all relate. So this is Homer, it goes over to Mark or whatever, and you have these arrows that point to this intertextual connection. And it's intended, my attempt is to make it as objective as possible. So you don't have to be a believer, you don't have to be a skeptic, you just have to be a reader to see that the author is using these intertextual devices, and it's quite remarkable. I want to say one other thing about this business of mimesis. We know, but very few people recognize how mimesis works. And by looking at Quintilian and Dionysius of Halicarnassus and Pseudo-Longinus and other texts on mimesis, I've been able to chart how this works. The first thing you do in mimesis is you pick out your typos, the model that you want to use. And so you figure out what that is. And you read it, and then you have what's called an homoiotis. The homoiotis is a similarity. So you do an imitation of it that has so many parallels with the typos that you're advertising that this is an alternative to this.
Right.
So that's your imitation. But the payoff comes in what's called a syncresis. We have a word called syncresis in English, and it comes directly out of Greek. And a syncresis is a comparison of the typos with the moietis, with the similarity. And it forms in several different ways. You can have a good character and another good character. You can have a good character in the typos and a better character in the similarity. You can have a bad character and you have a bad character, or you can have a bad character and a good character, and this in the rhetoricians, they tell you that.
Yeah. So the idea, well, they're different. That does not stop what they're doing. It may make it more difficult to make the case to convince a skeptic who isn't even knowledgeable of mimesis, but to someone who's fully baptized into this world you're describing, they'd look at that and go, yeah, that can't be a make or break. Are there enough in common for us to consider there's something going on here? They wouldn't walk away. If you were showing this, right, to Halicarnassus or, Dionysius or Quintilian or something, he said, hey, look at this in Mark. Imagine what he might say. He'd probably go, oh, clever.
That's right,
You know
exactly. And in fact, Dionysius of Halicarnassus says how much pleasure there is in recognizing the similarity in the syncresis. And so that's the payoff. Now, some people have argued, as you will know, that mimesis is hermeneutically not important. Mimesis is extremely important because it tells you why Jesus is better than Odysseus, or why Jesus' death is more noble than the death of Hector, or why Jesus can walk on water like Hermes. So there's a payoff in mimesis that most people don't recognize. And by the way, I'd have to say, in most of my career, I didn't see.
Right.
And when I went back to read everything I could by ancient rhetoricians about how they used antecedent texts, and that's what this commentary is about. I'm just using, so the vocabulary that I use is vocabulary not of modern scholarship.
Yeah.
I don't talk about redaction. I don't talk about pericope. I don't talk about a lot of the things that are a part of this discussion. I try to use the language of ancient rhetoric in order to describe what's going on. And almost, I would say, at least 3/4 of the Gospel of Mark can be identified in terms of intertextual connections from these 3 different forms.
Okay, so let me paint a picture here on why I think this is going to be an important gospel, but I want to use your context and your life, your experience. What's a movie that you loved growing up when you were young that they did a spin-off of later that was really good, but it was really well known when you were young? What can you think of one?
Yeah, I can. James Bond.
Okay.
And Austin Powers.
Okay. So that's a funny way of taking kind of a humorous turn to a serious agent who's so you have like a kind of an interesting newer spin-off of a syncresis here, the mimetic characters. But that in mind, the way I would like to paint how ancient mimesis in my mind operates the way you described it is this. Austin Powers would not have ever been popular, would have never been on the level that it was if there was not a foundation already established for a special agent, as we talk about.
That's exactly right.
So the best way to catapult, and they talk about this all the time, even in modern social circles, who you associate with is who you become, right? This is more of a social mimesis, right? We're getting into like a different area of thought, but who you are around, who you become like. Well, that applies to literature because if you're trying to be famous, if you're trying to make a piece of literature popular, the best thing you can do is imitate, model, or even look in some way with the greats. So on YouTube, advice to YouTubers out there, you trying to get popular, what you want to do is you want to do reactions, you want to imitate material that you find from Joe Rogan and the very popular great YouTube channels that are out there. That's a quick way to catapult to a popular level amongst other YouTubers. This probably works in almost any field. So as far as literature goes, you have this very, very important canonical material that's the air that they breathe. Well, how do you get yours to be as significant if you aren't imitating? It's a stupid business model to not do such a thing.
Do you think there's imitation in art?
Of course.
Of course.
Everything.
You think there's imitation in music?
No doubt.
No doubt. And if you're not trying to imitate a musician, you're not going to be a good musician.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that you replicate the other musician.
Yeah.
It's that you learn from them and then you try to improve on them. I read a book some time ago now on how important mimesis was in Byzantine culture. Almost every form of art and philosophy and music was a response in mimesis, and that was considered to be an honor to the model.
Right.
It was not intended, so it's an improvement on the model, but it also is an honor to the model that you chose that model in order to say what you're doing. Now, what happens in the Gospels is that when you're imitating Homer, you're trying to establish an alternative social identity that makes your hero better or more compassionate or stronger or more pious or whatever than what's over here.
At least what's over here, but more. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's so good but better.
Yeah.
And why we haven't seen that and why we can't respect it and why people think mimesis is theft is awful. And there's another passage, I think it's also from Dionysius of Halicarnassus, maybe Pseudo-Longinus, that says, mimesis is not theft. It comes right out and say it is not kleptos.
Yeah.
It is not theft. It's imaginary reappropriation.
Right.
And we've missed that piece. Now, we haven't missed it in terms of how the Gospels are using Jewish scriptures.
Right.
And we know that Jesus is a better imitation for some Christians than Moses or David or something.
Or Elijah or Elisha.
But mimesis allows you to make those associations outside of the Jewish Christian discourse and to embed it in its larger social context. Right. I've said this before, you know it, but I want to emphasize it for this podcast. For the period 200 BCE to 200 Common Era, we have over 600 fragments of Homer. We have 5 fragments of the Septuagint. 5. No. What literature are these people reading?
Right.
So I don't know how we're doing on our podcast.
Oh, we're good. We're good. Yeah,
Okay.
This is a powerful point. I look forward to seeing this commentary because, I've had a lot of people who are allergic in this academic world to your stuff. And as soon as I say, well, scripture's quoted, they're like, okay, cool. It's almost like a social trend among them to kind of not be. But that's why I'm also going to be interviewing like Courtney Friesen tomorrow. That's why I'm going to be talking to, Mark Bilby, why I'm going to be talking to Richard Miller, why I talk to you, why I talk to Robin Walsh, why I talk to people that I look to and go, yeah, they're on the right track. They see it. And it's not like I'm the arbiter of knowing what is true, but when you've been to the buffet and you get to see the food, everyone's giving you food, right? You can see some good stuff out of that particular food. You can see some good stuff. And you're able to compare the foods and you go, there's something exquisite about this particular food over here. And why is it in its own little buffet pocket and no one else, all the other food in here is over here? That alone makes me kind of go, what's going on? Why are they allergic to this? And when I read Litwa, for example, in his book, Jesus Deus, and he talks about this idea that we want to separate Jewish from, Greek and Roman, and, as if they weren't already Hellenized and stuff. Like, he did a good job there. And I thought, okay, I've got a whole portion of food to dig here. And I know they're right about this stuff. Maybe this is in the details, who knows, we'll find out, aren't 100%. But I know they're on the right track. And I'm sitting here as a non-PhD. I've ate the buffet, seen the food, read the books, thinking to myself, they got great contributions in those areas. But why is this not on the table? Why are they not coming to this side of the buffet and picking food up here? Why are they acting like, no, don't eat that? That's a weird thing that makes me think there's got to be political powers and social.
And let me say something about these charts that I have and these parallels. You can't do that with the whole buffet. The advantage of putting them side by side is you have to know that there's a relationship between them because you have verbal similarities, you have these other things going on. It's not that these things are floating up in space, with mythic patterns and so on.
Yeah.
These are and by the way, I didn't mention this, but it's a very important part. A friend of mine said, "Why don't you use binomial distribution probability theory?" I said, "What the heck is that?" And he was and still is, a doctor, but he's also a statistician with medicine.
Mm-hmm.
And he described what that is, and I use it over and over and over again in Mark to indicate that the probability of parallels between a Mark and Logoi, or between a Mark and Homer, let's say, but also Euripides, and one case Sophocles. What is the chance that those parallel motifs are arbitrary? And the lowest, the most probable number I have is 16%. Half of them are 0%. They have to be explained in some way. Now, there are multiple ways to explain it. In the humanities, I'm not aware of anybody that uses binomial distribution theory in order to see similarities between two texts. But you can do it with almost any literature.
Before we wrap things up here, we got a few more minutes. There was a book that a scholar wrote saying he mentioned your work, tried to show the mimesis in Mark. He only dealt with Mark, and he was trying to use only the scriptural explanations. He was kind of critiquing your work. I can't remember the scholar's name. Took it serious. He took your work serious in the sense that he was willing to engage it. And then he wrote trying to go to Elijah, Elisha, Moses.
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. So I read some of that, and I'm hoping that your commentary is going to really dive into Mark in such a way where it's like, look at this. Why? Because it sounds like, how you were saying, you would want to run in, we were talking about looking at Mark Bilby's position here, you'd want to see existing models you see that are already floating through Acts. And how would they butt up against that existing model with the newer information or insights he might have about these perceptions? It feels like that scholar's taking the model of Elijah, Elisha, and Moses and running it through, and he thinks almost like a train with a car on the tracks. Your stuff is the car on the tracks, and if I can show you Elijah, Elisha, Moses strong enough in these, boom, we can knock off his Homeric imitations and then use our model and not say that's irrelevant because I have a Jewish example that makes sense of this. Whereas you're saying, no, there's definitely Homeric stuff, and your train is coming along going, cool. Listen, I'm not trying to wreck your scriptures. You can keep that. We'll have synchrosis here. You can have that and understand imitation. I'm hoping some of that gets spelled out in this, because that debate, if you will, I think a lot of people like to just defer to that material and go, oh, we dismiss Dennis McDonald because of this.
Well, and you remember that the first category I have is use of scripture.
Right.
So I'm not denying that. I'm in fact parading it, and so that I identify it. The issue is how much of the biblical narrative informs the Markan narrative.
Right.
And is it as compelling as you have in the Homeric one? I know who you're talking about. He's actually a friend of mine.
Yeah.
Adam
Wynn.
Adam Wynn. That's who it is.
Yeah.
And I wasn't convinced by anything in the book when he got to those biblical analogies to try to bump me off the track. But yeah, you're right. This book, I think, will help other people make a judgment about, what is the antitext that is. Now, let me say that I really think the core of this book is in the methodology and dealing with how intertextuality worked in antiquity and how it is hermeneutically useful.
Right.
It tells you what the author is trying to accomplish.
Yeah, and so I'm thinking Carl Olav Sandnes too is another person who thinks he practically admitted on our episode that I do think there's some really good reasons to think, but he thinks it's flowering it, not guiding the meaning, if you will.
Right. That's where syncresis is important.
Yeah, that's I can't wait for this commentary. Anyway, right now, if you're looking for something that you really should be reading, is Dennis McDonald's Feuding Gospel Authors book. Listen, I said this before, and listen, I never lie, okay? You will go to hell for all eternity if you don't buy this book. Totally kidding. Okay. Seriously, I love you, Dennis, and I appreciate your insight.
Thank you, Derek. Okay.
And thank you for watching, everybody. So be sure to subscribe, check out his book. Until next time.